friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time, and I'm finally getting to shoot a video outside, but just know that by the time you see this video, all this greenery you see back here will be even more green, and you won't even be able to see the greenhouse that's right back here because it'll be fully filled in with the grapevines I have growing up here, and then the blueberries that are right behind me that are in pots here up on the deck. And the reason for that is I'm 6 weeks ahead on all my videos except for my Monday this and that video. So yes, I'm shooting this 6 weeks before you're seeing it. But anyway, what I wanted to talk about today was one of the things I'm focusing on this year when it comes to what I'm growing in my garden. So typically with things like rhubarb, I'm only going to put up so much, but out of my 2 rhubarb plants, I still get a ton of rhubarb every year, and I only have 2, and I don't use that much rhubarb. So I've frozen a bunch and used it to make a homemade rhubarb wine. I dehydrate up a bunch because it takes up a lot less room. I use the rhubarb mixed with berries for making pies and crisps and jams. And in fact, a peach rhubarb syrup is great, but eventually you just still have way more than you ever can use. A lot of times you're giving it away. But one of the things I decided I'm going to do this year with a lot of these things, including herbs like my golden oregano, which now I get way more than I can use, even though it's one of my favorite herbs to use for culinary purposes. So what I'm doing is actually I'm dehydrating up a lot more rhubarb, vacuum sealing it in jars. And I also plan on doing that with my snow peas this year because I still have a lot put up from previous years. And also zucchini, get tons of zucchini. In fact, I'm growing even more zucchini this year than is normal. So even out of 3 plants, we could get way more than we can use. But I've got over 6 plants right now. And same thing with potatoes. I'm putting in even more potatoes this year. And a couple more examples are things like marshmallow leaves. I get tons and tons. And dandelion flowers. So these are things that easily grow a lot for us. These are just a couple of examples. I could also include sage, oregano, and many other herbs into that. But and then beans, because I grow lots and lots of beans, which can be used for green beans or even beans for cooking to make chili and so on. And also apples. We get far more apples off our tree when it's a good year, that is. Not like last year where everything for everybody all around, all the fruit trees did not produce because we had such a late freeze. But aside from putting up extra to get us through another year or two, just in case something like that happens, putting up extra and either dehydrating or canning it so that it can be used through the year for barter. Now, obviously, when these things are coming in fresh, you might be able to barter or sell these goods when they're fresh. But things like zucchini and rhubarb, for instance, people are typically only buying that fresh. Well, what's going to happen if they want some during the year and it's not coming in fresh and people are done putting it up and giving it all away? Well, if I have this dehydrated up, and another one I was going to mention was pumpkin. I'm planting a lot more pumpkins this year. So, and I still have pumpkin dehydrated up from years prior. And so I've got tons. I got enough pumpkin right now to get me through a couple of years. That's not counting what I'm growing right now. But my goal is that even though I'll always keep experimenting with more types of foods and herbs, I'm going to keep putting a good amount of focus on the things that do well so that I can use them to barter for things that do not do as well for us, or even to be able to get dairy or meat from locals who raise that. So this is more what I'm looking into, and the same would apply to the homemade wine, especially since I can make tons of wine out of my apples, my rhubarb, and the grapes I get just from here, way more than we can ever use, especially since we don't drink. The wine I make for using for cooking, marinating, and making tinctures most predominantly, but having some on hand that's already ready to go is a great barter item. So that's really what I'm looking at, is using what I can do on our limited space, or just even in the limitations we have because of our very cool and very, very, very wet climate that does limit what we can grow, but the things that we can grow usually do extremely well. So, and then also even the eggs from my chickens. So I can sell eggs from my chickens while they're laying heavily through this time of year, but I've been dehydrating up a lot too. So even though right now we only have 9 chickens, we got 2 more coming to us from a friend that we bartered for by sharing some of my dried herbs and live plants. And that's something else too. If you get a lot of live plants that just come up, like I get lots of lemon balm and marshmallow baby plants, I can give those away. Even valerian plants now, I'm getting a lot of those starting to come up from the seed that falls from the previous year. So we can use those things for barter as well. So aside from putting up food for ourselves to last for a year, a minimum of 1 to 2 years, continuing to put up the excess instead of just letting it go to waste in the garden means I can have more food to barter with, or herbs, be they medicinal or culinary, like I mentioned the golden oregano or even the Mediterranean oregano and thyme, which both have medicinal purposes. And then even things like I've been making more honeysuckle plants off my honeysuckle by simply just breaking off a branch, sticking it in some root tone and sticking it in a pot. And I have quite a few honeysuckle plants now, and I dehydrate up the flowers. That can be mostly, this is for infusing in oil, but you can use these for teas, and the fresh ones obviously you can use in salads. But again, if we're talking about putting this stuff up, then this is something we can barter with as well. And honeysuckle does great here, and so do a lot of berries like raspberries, blackberries, and more. So any way that you can put these up, and the reason I'm looking more at dehydrating rather than canning is that I can put a lot into one jar, and somebody can grab that and use a little bit at a time and not have to dedicate themselves to a whole jar at one time of whatever. Obviously, if I'm going to barter with them within the jars themselves, this would be, and this is another reason why I'm looking at dried goods, is that if somebody wants to buy them but they don't want to pay for the jar, because I would charge them for the jar because I would have to replenish my jars, or they can pay me for the product plus give me a jar of their own, and we can trade off that way. That way I always have jars on hand. But if they don't want to do that, then I can easily repackage into a Ziploc bag, and then they can repackage however they want at home. Something that's cheap and I don't mind doing that with. So that's why the dried goods is something I'm looking at. And I don't think I showed them yet, but here's another example like of the potatoes. I'm actually planning on canning more potatoes this year, as well as dehydrating more. This is a potato powder I made for making mashed potatoes. Not exactly instant like the kind you buy in the store, but it still works really good. And I have a video on this I'll link to down below. But this is one example here, but I'm also planning on dehydrating potatoes in chunks as well. So whether it be for our own use or for use for barter. So another thing that I'm doing, growing lots more potatoes. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because that's just something you can consider as we're looking at the continued increase of food prices and food scarcity, as well as what's happening with our money, and having other ways that we can get things that we need that don't involve actual money, but barter instead, trading for things, I really think is going to be an important thing to focus on. So, and don't forget, I did a video about bartering not too long ago, either last summer or maybe more recent than that, and I'll link to that down below. But there's lots of other things. If you can't grow a garden, there's many other things that you can barter with to maybe get food and other things from people who can grow gardens or can raise cattle and sheep and so on. So there's a lot you can do. Don't forget you have skills, and I think everybody has some kind of skill that they can do or service that they can do in exchange for food. So don't forget these options there. But anyway, I just wanted to share this as an idea. And it doesn't even just have to be stuff that you grow, but maybe it's stuff that you can forage for. Like down by our other piece of property, I can get a lot of horsetail and dehydrate up a whole bunch of that. And so if somebody needs horsetail for medicinal purposes, then I can have extra put up. Maybe they could go gather it themselves, but they don't have the means to properly dehydrate it. So that is something else to consider, is that maybe there's people that have gardens, but they don't have the means to put the foods up to get them through the year. So they don't have means of dehydrating properly, especially if they live in a humid climate. Hanging things up to dehydrate is not efficient, but they can't afford an electric dehydrator and certainly can't afford a freeze dryer, or can't afford the, you know, canning equipment for putting the foods up that way. And one more point I want to come back to is when you're looking at selling or using these items for barter, don't forget to consider in all your costs. So always, every time, somebody's got to be out here making noise. So I think they just like to contribute. So things like zucchini and rhubarb, for example, dehydrate up very small. In fact, dehydrating in particular takes up less space than any other form of food preservation, even freeze drying. Freeze drying does not reduce the things in size near as much as dehydrating does. But a freeze dryer is a lot more expensive to own and to run, and you have to consider wear and tear on your items. So if you're dehydrating, consider the consumption of electricity. Even if you're using solar power to run your electric dehydrators, the energy might be free, but the maintenance and the solar panels and the battery bank and all these things were not free. So you still have to consider your energy consumption when doing these things. And then especially in regards to dehydrated foods, here's an example. You've got to consider, pay attention to how much is actually going into your jar. So in this jar is approximately 8 regular size zucchinis. And when I say regular size, I'm talking about this big, because we get decent sized zucchinis here. So just standard size. And in this jar is about 16 standard size stalks of rhubarb. So that's quite a bit. So consider, what would you charge per zucchini or per stalk of rhubarb, and then add that in, and then again consider your time to chop and prepare and to dehydrate and all these things, and the wear and tear on any of your equipment that you're using. Let's just say I was charging $1 a stalk for rhubarb. Well, that'd be $16 just for the rhubarb alone. And then I got to consider the time that I put into this, and the electric consumption, the wear and tear, and the cost of the jar and the lid. So all of these things need to be considered. So don't cheat yourself, especially when you're talking about things that, like the jars and the lids, that you may never get back. You want to consider your cost in that, so that if the person isn't willing or doesn't have jars and lids that they can trade you for, then you have to still replenish your jars, and that's going to cost money. It would be best if they can trade you or repackage your things into things that are cheaper or easy to get a hold of. So all these things have to be considered when you're looking at doing something like this for barter. Anyway, I just wanted to throw these ideas out to you, and don't forget to check out my video on bartering that I'll be putting down below. And also I'll put, since I just did a video on dehydrating rhubarb, I'll go ahead and put that video down below, and anything else I think might be apropos. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed this video, and any ideas and thoughts you have, please put those in comments down below. Thanks for watching. Take care, and God bless.